Mass Effect Andromeda.
Mm-hmm.
How much time did you sink into this?
Boy, I think at this point, I'm a little above 60 hours in it.
Wow.
If you don't count the live stream yesterday where I added in another like 6 on it.
A lot of time, yeah.
But
So it's like half a Persona, kind of.
but
Where's the one?
what I want to say about that right off the bat, though, is that it's a game that you can sort of like engage with at different levels. So like I'm hesitant to say like Mass Effect Andromeda is a 60-hour game.
Right.
Because
right.
like if you are really into the content that it offers and you're interested in sort of like maybe the first and second tier quest lines and stuff, you'll probably get like, 40 to 60 hours out of it. But like if you just want to be like, hey, I want to know what this story's about, or I can't stand these characters, I don't want to do any loyalty missions, I just want to plow through it. Like my guess is probably 20 hours or so.
So what is, after all this time with the game, your one sentence summation of Mass Effect Andromeda?
I think the one sentence breakdown of this is that Mass Effect Andromeda has a lot of problems and I still had fun with it.
Interesting. Okay. Let's start with the fun. What does this game get right?
Yeah. So I think the best thing about this game, the way it compares most favorably to the original trilogy is in combat. And that makes me, that's a hard thing to say too, because like on one hand, this is kind of a fresh start for Mass Effect. So you kind of want to take it as its own thing, but it also is just not going to escape the shadow of like Commander Shepard's trilogy, right?
Of course
like
not.
that set some expectations, that established a universe and all that. So it's hard to go into this and not compare in pretty much every way.
Yeah. By the way, Reiner, you also finished it, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm done with it.
So please jump in and cut you off whenever you
He's
like.
completely wrong. No.
Okay, so combat feels...
I think combat is the best because what they've done is like in Mass Effect 3, they had a multiplayer and single player sort of had slightly different combat systems.
Yeah.
In Andromeda, they've unified them into one combat system that plays more on the multiplayer side of things, which just means that it moves faster. It feels more responsive. It's more fluid. It's less tactical in the sense that you aren't like pausing to bring up like a tactical wheel to be like, okay, you do this, but like you're doing less direction of your party members and stuff. And
I can hear 1,000 voices crying out with that.
See,
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know.
seriously, it's less RPG is what you're saying, right? It's more just run and gun combat.
exactly. The combat, it has RPG elements, it like built into the systems in any number of other ways. But in terms of the combat, I feel like Mass Effect prior to this had a little bit of trouble with its identity in that sense too. How do you do a third-person shooter and make it feel RPG-like? And because like it was never super deep on the tactical side, you didn't necessarily need to dive into that stuff.
Don't you think Mass Effect 3 kind of struck that balance pretty well, though?
At the time, I liked it.
Yeah.
Now I like this better.
Yeah,
Oh,
I agree
wow.
too.
So,
It's definitely I wouldn't say most polished, but definitely the most entertaining combat they've delivered.
Just because of the action angle.
Yeah, I don't know if you could say that as far as the scenario design. I think 3 maybe had some more big set piece moments that I enjoyed more than this. But the kind of mechanics of the combat and how biotics and the gunplay are all kind of sewn together and movement, I think it works better. I don't like the auto cover system.
Yeah, so it's no longer tapping A to get into cover.
Right. I understand why they did that. Just simplicity, one less button press, but it's not the most reliable thing. Like it doesn't always take cover, or if there's someone else in cover in front of you, a teammate, you're screwed. Like they're not moving. That's a design I was like, whoa, that's weird.
What that does though is, and I agree with Reiner, like the auto cover gets to be frustrating when it doesn't take.
Mm-hmm.
But the button that you used to press to go into cover is now your like jump button.
Jump and jetpack, right?
Yeah. So you're using, instead of, I think it represents a sort of change in focus for the combat, which is like, it's less about hunkering down in cover and like popping up and shooting guys as they advance. And it's more about like, you're in cover for a little bit and then you're flushed out, like enemies come around or something, or you need to move. So then it's like, okay, you're going to jump up to like another tier because the environments generally have more like different levels to them now. So you're going to jump up on top of something and then you're going to have to move and then you're going to jump down and dash away behind something else. So it's a little more, like mobile and temporary in that sense.
So Mass Effect, or Andromeda is the best Mass Effect to date. It's good to know. Great news
Yeah, that's
for
great.
fans.
Now let's finally talk about everything. No, it's interesting because we were so plugged in to so much enthusiasm from the Mass Effect community, about Andromeda. I cannot recall a single comment about, boy, I can't wait to get into the combat scenarios of the new Mass Effect. I feel like, you're doing a lot of that, but I don't know if people were excited about it for more Mass Effect combat.
Right. It's really secondary for me.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's better. That's great. They made strides forward, but I think the rest of the game, they kind of took a step back in terms of narrative, again, design overall, I think.
Game design, art design?
Game design.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could throw in some of that too. In terms of, the internet has been on fire with people complaining about eyes and lip syncing and glitches.
Is that just people capturing specific moments, or is it a prevalent thing throughout your guys' experience with the game?
So whenever you're dealing with something like this, like if you're looking in a forum thread that is a compilation of, janky animation things,
right?
It's going to look more serious than it actually is. But with that being said, like, this isn't the sort of thing like, oh, only once every hour I saw something a little weird. It's like definitely more than once an hour there was a sort of weird animation or some sort of weird glitch or,
What does weird animation mean? Is it like the full cowboy bow-legged walking around the ship?
Sometimes it's that. Sometimes,
characters phasing into each other.
Yeah, sometimes it's you're having a conversation with someone and one of your party members is just sort of awkwardly stuttering around between you, It's like things like a whole range of things happen like that.
Oh my God.
Okay. But this is not unheard of in games like this, though, like Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Witcher. There's higher levels of texture quality and stuff like that in some of those games, but there's a lot of jank that comes along with some of these games. Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 kind of set a bar, right? Like they were kind of trendsetters in a way in that generation of like, wow, I've never seen anything like this in the first Mass Effect.
Yeah.
Combat was not great in that, but wow, what a great experience that was. Just because, wow, the story, the choices you have in this, the character development, all that was huge. This game, it seems like they were very timid in all those categories. And I wonder if it's that storm cloud that came from like the ending of 3 of choice of them like, hey, my choice didn't matter in the end. It's like, well, we're going to kind of scale that back so we don't run into that problem again.
So it's a double-edged sword of giving players choices. They're going to be outraged. So are you saying choice overall is just lessened this time around?
Oh, yeah. But like in a way, I was trying to talk about this during the live stream too, and it's a hard thing to articulate because like in the original trilogy, choice was presented to you as like, this is going to be important. There are going to be more games. You need to sort of like weigh what you do, and you're going to see the consequences of your actions. So you're playing through that game knowing that choice is going to be a part of it. You still have to make some choices as Ryder, but the game is like makes no promises in its tone or setup that like what you're like the choices you're making are really going to be like significant. It just like de-emphasizes them.
It could be
from a storytelling perspective.
I don't want to spoil anything, but it could be something as simple as, do you save the Krogans or this other new species? And then the next sequence you have, you'll see Krogans walking around or, that new species. Like
guys.
a lot of times it's very minimal where you don't really feel like it has a lasting effect. Where it's like, was it Mass Effect 1 where it's like, this is the last alien of this species.
The Rachni?
Yeah, and it's like, it's super evil. Do you let it go or are you going to kill it off? That, and when you let it go, you're like, oh crap, like, is that going to come back and haunt me? Like, I never had that feeling in this game.
Yeah, and I think what it feels like is just like a question of scale. Like, because of the scale of the choices you were making as Shepard, you expected to see ripples from them.
Yeah.
And in this one, like in general, the scale of the choices you're making is so small that like you might see consequences for them, but it just doesn't set the expectation of like, I'm really shaping the course of the galaxy here.
So without spoiling anything, again, does it make a self-contained story? Does it wrap things up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is it interesting?
Yeah. I mean, we're being really negative here, but I think we've kind of driven it this way. But like I was saying, like Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 set a really high standard for this series. And then I think people really expected another leap with the new generation of like, this is a next gen Mass Effect game, but it ends up feeling more like a 3.5 in my mind, right? Like
not score wise, Mass Effect 3.5.
Yeah, like it ends up feeling like more of the same, yet it's a new character, a new galaxy, but they didn't really kind of break convention to the degree I think people were wanting. And I think that's okay. This is a good game. Like I had a really good time playing it.
Really good.
I looked forward to playing it every night.
I'm still playing it. My review's up. I'm still
Okay.
playing it.
All right. It's
so
like The Hobbit to Lord of the Rings. Is that what this is?
So
oh,
here's-
interesting.
Here's one of the things, like building off of, building off of what Reiner said, and then what I said earlier is that like one of the reasons I think that there's such negativity out there about this game is just the comparison point. Is the fact that like Mass Effects 1, 2, 3 were definitely like 9+ games, right?
Yep.
And then you get to this one that is just a noticeable step back from that. So then the temptation is to say, oh, this is trash or this is bad, and it's not that it's bad. It's a step down, but I still had fun with it.
Yeah.
I think it is still good. It
And-
is just not as good.
It's like white chocolate compared to dark chocolate.
It's a
you
full-
obviously
yeah,
want dark
exactly.
chocolate.
Mass Effect
not
white chocolate.
It's a really interesting foundation, and I wonder like 6 years from now if it ends up being a trilogy, if we're going to look back on this first one more fondly than we do today, just because of what it established. Like Mass Effect 1 was, a lot of people trash that game now when they played it now.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was like, holy crap, this really set a new standard, but it wasn't that, like the level of 2 or 3. Like,
Yeah.
I think we might hopefully see a
But
similar.
I mean, they aren't really. That is not the message from BioWare and EA that this is the start of a trilogy. It's still very nebulous as to we'll see.
Well,
There we
and-
go.
And the game, I feel like the game does that in a smart way. I mean, Ben, you asked if this is like a standalone thing. One of you two Bens did.
One of us.
We're
do.
the same.
We're the same. It doesn't matter.
But the point being is like they establish Andromeda as a potential new setting for future Mass Effect games. Like this is a new storytelling front for Mass Effect that they could pursue. There's enough threads there going forward without it feeling like a cliffhanger. They don't do the like, oh no, what's gonna happen next? You get a satisfying story, but they could still mine more there going forward.
Get your kids, Ryder. We got to go back and get your kids.
Assholes or something.
I mean, they do. On that note, they do. There is a post-credit sequence that is your typical post-credit sequence of,
Okay.
there's more coming.
Yeah.
But you don't know what that means.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, it's not exciting.
That's fine. So I still don't feel like I have a sense. Buggy. You say
Yeah,
flawed.
like
I don't really have a sense.
We started
of
with the
what
nuts and
else.
bolts, right?
Yeah.
We should have started with what's really interesting about this is you are traveling to a new galaxy, like 600 years in the future from Shepherd State, and there's that whole unknown quantity that you start with, where it's like it really is cool when you go to a planet. Your team has no idea what to expect. Like it's even just from the atmosphere, they don't know what they're getting into, and then they start scanning stuff, and you feel like you're part of this expedition team where it's like, we don't know what this is made of. It might be, this structure might be 300 to 400 years old. We're not sure.
Does it pull off that framing, Joe?
Early on, yeah.
Early on,
Okay.
it does. Like in the first, I'd say 10 hours. Like I couldn't wait. As I was playing, I'm like, man, I want to get out there and explore some new planets, see some more stuff. Like it, excuse me, it sells the concept of like being intrepid. It sells the concept of like being of exploring things that people haven't seen before. But as you start to, for me anyway, as I started to uncover more of the answers to some of these things, like, okay, who are these mysterious villains and what do they want? What's up with these, ancient artifacts that are littered across the planet?
Yeah.
Who's the bad guy? Things like as you get the answers to those questions, like those questions are set up in an interesting way and they are answered in a disappointing way. Like the answers that you get to those questions are not as satisfying or mysterious as the sort of
Some of it.
setup leads you to think it is.
And the characters. Let's go.
Well, I want to say some of it. I did like some of the payoffs, like
Okay.
with like heady science fiction stuff. I thought they did some pretty cool stuff. Some of it's pretty ambiguous and uncertain. The villain sucked. I think Joe and I both agree there
Oh,
that
yeah.
he's ambiguous at the beginning, and then you're like, okay, they'll flesh him out later, and it's like, well, no, they didn't. Okay, we'll have a showdown and we're good to go.
Oh boy. Okay.
But there's some really great story beats in there, and a lot of that is tied to those characters, like you just said. Like I like some of those guys, Drac, Jaal. I even like Cora. I know a lot of people don't, but I liked her backstory. I thought was really interesting, and they did some cool stuff with her. So companion wise, I think they did a decent job. Again, I mean, you're going against some all-time video game greats too. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas some of them are, I think the the biggest failure in this game for me is it doesn't feel alien enough. In that I'm in a new galaxy in the future, and you brought all of your baggage, so to speak, from the previous trilogy along with this one. And that includes like all the familiar species, the familiar archetypes for those species, like the Krogans. Hey, guess what? They're into war.
A little too aggressive.
And then the genophage, that comes up again. And you're just like, that happened like 600 years ago. We're going into this again. Like,
it feels like when people go camping in an RV and they bring like their game consoles with them.
Okay. Well, to Reiner's point on that, like, to me, I wasn't as bothered by the fact that it brought the stuff that it did from the Milky Way, the Solarians and the Krogans and all that stuff. That wouldn't have bothered me as much if they had also counterbalanced it with like
that's a fair point.
Significant new stuff. But like most of the races you're interacting with are the races that you've been interacting with for several games. There are 2 new species in Andromeda.
Oh, that's it. Wow.
And one of them is evil. So like one of them is your enemy. So there's like one new species that you're actually like interacting with.
There's like creatures in the world and stuff, but like intelligent life.
Yeah. And the other problem with that is that like while I actually like the designs of both of those species, like I think they look cool, they don't look different. They don't look like, wow, I'm in a new galaxy. Look at those things. It looks like they could have been designed for DLC for the original trilogy.
Yeah, who are those little spider guys interacting with the terminals in Citadel?
Oh yeah, like the keepers.
Those guys were more alien and mysterious than anything in this game.
Yeah.
The original trilogy had Hanar, like those floating jellyfish things.
Right,
right. Because like this game actually doesn't bring every old species over. So like there aren't keepers in this game. Obviously, there aren't Hanar, there aren't Elcor. Like a lot of those have sort of there aren't Quarians. Those have sort of
holy cow, that's a bombshell.
So interesting.
And just the hook of like all these species like traveling to the Andromeda galaxy. It's so cool, right? Like they don't know what they're getting into. I love that. Some arcs disappear. They don't know what's going and the arcs are like that species, right?
Yeah.
Like, yes, there's some on other, like manning the medical systems, all that stuff on the other arcs, but like that's just a whole species that's gone in this quadrant of the universe. And I liked all those hooks, but again, it just ends up feeling more. It feels very familiar in this new galaxy, and I really did like the introduction of Jaws. What was his species?
Angaran.
The Angaran, like that whole story arc is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
That was I was like, okay, this game's really starting to fire on all cylinders, and then it ended up feeling familiar again.
Joe, so Reiner seems to be positive on the new crew. Where do you fall on the new cast?
Again, I think that they are decent characters.
Okay.
I mean,
not
again,
the BioWare standard.
It is. I mean, like it sounds negative to say like this is my least favorite Mass Effect cast, but like the other 3 Mass Effect casts were so good. So like that's not necessarily as like damning as it sounds.
One thing,
and I also like real quick, like Reiner mentioned, like Drawl, Jack. Those are like Drac and Jawl are.
How can you not keep these straight, Joe?
Like there are cool characters in this game. So it's not like it's not getting to know them isn't fun. It's not like doing their because they each have loyalty missions that are like quest threads. So it's not like doing those isn't enjoyable, and unraveling these backstories, like that's all fun stuff. It's again not as good, but it's not bad.
They're like the friends you meet at summer camp. You're like, oh, it was fun to hang out for a while, but we're not really going to.
Yeah, you're not going to.
I hope there's not a sequel.
Yeah, you're not going to write letters. They don't make your list of top 10 friends.
Yeah,
right.
And there's something weird with this in how you kind of interact with these characters. In that, like Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, there was definitely an arc they followed. The same arc through all those games where it's like you get to know them, then they become kind of a romance option toward the end, right? And it's like that. Yeah. Up until that final big push in the game, it's like that 3/4 mark.
Yeah.
It seemed like that's where that.
I feel like
The
sometimes it pops up
began?
confusingly early. But
Well, this game,
It's super early in it.
this game, it's like,
really?
hey, who are you? And they're like, hi, I'm Cora. I'm here. Want a hump? Like that's like
Well,
it's
that's
right
my
out of the
strategy
game.
usually. Yeah.
It is like romance option after one question. You can immediately start flirting, and you could do that with everybody on your crew.
People
Wow.
bash the writing in Andromeda, but honestly, I think Wanna Hump sounds pretty good.
That's a good name.
It feels a little
Good
bit
name.
like focus group gone awry in the sense that like, hey, people seem to like romances. They get attached to these characters in Mass Effect games, so we're just gonna like make that available for everyone as early as possible.
Who is the focus group? An orgy? How are the sexy sex scenes?
Well,
I kissed a girl.
Did you like it?
It's all right.
Cool.
let's see. So I've gone through and seen a few different ones. A couple of them
Wait, in one playthrough you can do multiple, or you like save? And
you can kind of. I did both.
Okay.
There are basically characters who are
Riding dirty.
there are a few characters who are
Ryder
down
dirty.
for like no strings attached stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then there are some characters that are more committed. So I did a little of both where I had to reload to see some different ones. The point being is that for a few of the scenes, they did the like fade to black
Okay.
stuff. So it's like
Lesser important love interest. Like
no,
didn't get the whole
no. I mean, we're
animated-
talking. Okay, so like, I had what I assume was going to be a sex scene with Vetra, who's like your female Turian party member.
Yeah.
And that's one where you just sort of like sit down, like lay down by the bed, and then it sort of like fades out.
Yeah.
So there's nothing
Oh,
too
boy.
too crazy there. There's one with PB where you like are kind of in it's kind of like a zero gravity situation where you're like in an escape pod, you turn off the gravity and there's some like smooching, and then it sort of like zooms out from the door. So it's like, oh, that's all pretty tame. So I was like, I don't know what all the fuss was about. And then this morning I reloaded and saw the sex scene with Jal.
Yeah.
Like
Who's the Angarian
and
guy?
so like I'm a female rider with Jal, and like that is like you straight up see like topless Ryder.
What?
And
100%
then-
topless?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like
What?
oh
Really?
yeah. Like Ryder's breasts are on display.
I'll be back.
in
And
the
I've
Jal,
seen
in the
everything.
Jal sex scene, and then it straight up goes down to like it gets into oral sex territory.
Oh.
So like
Wow.
not explicit, but like stopping a few seconds before it gets
So
explicit.
very hit or miss.
Wow.
So I mean, I guess I don't even know. Like the
they
point
run the
of this,
gamut apparently.
the point of this is more to say that there's a lot of variety in the kinds of payoff versus me saying like, yeah, I love the more explicit sex scene.
yeah, which
Right.
sex
You know,
scene
but-
should you play with your kids? Is the question.
Yeah.
Oh, is
Anyways,
he a
Joe, you
mushroom?
gave Andromeda an 8?
I gave it an 8. I did. I enjoyed it. One thing that we didn't really even touch on that I wanted to point out is just like because some of the problems with the game are so conspicuous from a like visual or like technical standpoint that I think it's easy to really put the spotlight on that stuff and stay negative with it.
Yeah.
And
It's a good
I
game.
completely like
Okay.
I'm not trying to like spin this in some weird way. Like I completely acknowledge all of these flaws in the game. But I think it's important to also not lose sight that like Reiner and I have been talking about, like this game does stuff well, and one of the things it does well is just like the wealth of content that there is to explore in it too. I think from you have your main missions that take you through like the core story, and then each of your 6 party members has a whole like loyalty thread. So it's more than just like one-off mission with them. You're sort of like doing several things with these characters. And then there are other outstanding mysteries, like what happened to the arcs, like the arc carrying
The
the
missing
Turians,
ones, yeah.
Solarians, Asari. Like what's up with them? There's a sort of mystery surrounding the Ryder family that you're sort of going out and collecting things on. In addition to benefits you get from when you make a planet more habitable. So you like establish an outpost on is it 4, maybe 4 different other planets? You can sort of like have little colonies going and things like that. So there are all of these things, and these are not just the basic like go around the map, collect 5 satellites, because there's a whole layer of that content too that's maybe a little less substantial. But all this stuff I'm talking about here, like this is what I'd call like first or second tier quest stuff. This is the stuff that you're interested in when you're playing, and just going through all of that stuff was about 60 hours for me.
I still feel like this discussion, I don't understand it. Thankfully, we have a game club coming up next week. Get ready, everybody. Send emails into podcast@gameformer.com with your thoughts on the first couple hours of the game. But I don't understand. So it seems like It's an open world RPG. Reiner says it's good. It's a open world RPG that's not as good as the Mass Effect trilogy. Has
Those
some
games
glitches.
were great. Right?
That's it. Has some glitches. 8. I feel like there's a couple ingredients I'm missing as to what's going to be frustrating playing this game. It's just.
I mean, if you want, like, I talked about some of the stuff in my review, and there's actually a feature up on our site that's sort of like 5 small changes you could make that would make this game much more enjoyable.
Okay.
You know? So what it boils down to is like there are some systemic things from like the way your progression works, from the way, for me, like the way inventory is structured, the way the interface works, the way certain important elements of the game are like sometimes just not explained. So there are all of these little things that sort of like, I think as Dan Tack had phrased it earlier, it's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts for this game, you know?
Interesting. Okay, that's exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of it is really, really interesting. Like Joe said, like we're just summarizing it in a matter of seconds, but you could be on a quest line that you really enjoy for like 8 hours. Like, oh, I want to see where this is going. He's right. Some of the payoffs are not great. And when you have a villain that's just not there, and that's like the big threat you're going against, that's a buzzkill. That's a big buzzkill for me, where it's just like, okay, like you've done such a great job, Saren, the KOTOR series. They've always had interest. Not always,
Man. In Mass
Elusive
Effect,
Man. Yeah, like wow.
But then there's also Kai. What is that Mass Effect 3 guy's name?
Yeah, Kai Lang.
Yeah. Okay.
That
There's also
was
Kai.
a big bummer for me in Dragon Age. Is like I felt the villain there was a little weak. So it feels like.
But he was front and center in Inquisition, at least early on. Just like, whoa, okay, this is a threat, right? The first thing you see of this
even
guy.
less present than that.
Oh
guy?
yeah.
Oh my.
Oh
gosh.
yeah. You don't really get a good taste of him until the last third, right?
The difference, I think it's actually not that different from Saren in the first game, because like Saren was largely not present in the original Mass Effect, except your whole mission was like hunt down Saren. It's almost got a Final Fantasy VII like Sephiroth vibe, right? Where it's like people are talking about Saren. You're hunting Saren down. You're always just sort of a step behind Saren, so you get this sense of his presence in the story, even if you're not like talking to him face to face all the time, right?
Yeah.
This guy's a step behind you.
Yeah.
So you're the Pathfinder. That was terrible. But you are like front and center, and then you kind of every once in a while see him like being frustrated with stuff you've done. So you're not really getting a good
Shaking
sense
his
of
fist in the air.
seriously.
Ryder.
Who dropped this can here?
That actually happens.
Really?
But you kind of see that stuff and you're just like, okay, the music's ominous. Apparently he's pretty bad. He's kind of goofy looking.
Yeah.
And then you don't really get a good taste of what he's up to until the end. There's mysteries surrounding him with outer space, even like something called the Scourge, that you're like, okay, what's this all about? But you don't really get a good taste until the end. So that's disappointing. But some of those quests are very cool. Even some of the smaller missions that you do are interesting. The writing, I think, by and large, is very good.
Would you guys ever not recommend this game right now to someone that enjoyed playing the original trilogy? Would you ever hold back? Do you feel like it slices off a certain amount of that audience with the overall quality?
Man, I mean, the answer to that question really boils down to like your tolerance for like technical weirdness, because like the original trilogy definitely had like weird animations, weird facial stuff going on sometimes. So if that was your low bar, if that was your threshold for like this is as janky as a game can possibly be for me to play it, like Andromeda is worse on those fronts. So like then maybe you probably shouldn't get along with.
But if you can handle some hiccups,
but like I mean I think as you know, as a big fan of that series, it felt like I was playing another Mass Effect game. I think it feels like Mass Effect. It's cool to be back in the universe again. It's not perfect. There are things about it that are frustrating, but it's entertaining. I don't know, you know, like that's my takeaway.
I think the big question is, did you like the original Mass Effect trilogy? If you answer yes, do you want to see what happens next? If you answer yes, this is it. So I mean, seriously, yeah. I mean, it is building off. It is building off of that universe, or you know, that story in interesting ways. I think there's some cool stuff and some threads they leave open. I want to play a sequel already. You know, I'm like, okay, I want to see where this goes. There's some interesting things that you've set up. Hopefully, you can knock that one out of the park. And whereas this one was, they tried a lot and some of it didn't pay off.
Right? It has problems, and it is more, but it is more than the sort of disaster circus you may think it is from.
It's amazing
looking
how
online.
much that kind of
Yeah.
hate train ramped up again, leaving off from Mass Effect 3's ending. But I'm sure we'll talk about it
I
playing
think
the game
like
club.
people settled down after the end of 3, but then just like built back up off of that. Like people were just like being quiet and still stewing a little bit about it.
It's like,
and
yeah,
ready
their
to hate on
pitchforks were
Mass
just
Effect.
getting cold, and it's like, all right, here we
Time
go.
to go again.
It's,
Well, I
it's
think-
shocking.
I mean, if you look back, there's some janky animations from 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, of course, yeah.
A lot of it. But this one hit before the game came out, right? Like there was that grace period of like EA access where people are just recording it, and people just latched onto that.
And when there's
thread.
no like reviews or anything more concrete
That's
to go
all
off
they
of at
latched
that
onto
point,
was
that's
just like,
interesting.
it's janky, it's broken,
Yeah.
disaster.
There's, blood in the water in some
Yep.
way. in some
Yeah,
sense
for
there,
sure.
too, yeah.
I feel like this is by proxy or a byproduct of you saying that combat's fun, but multiplayer, I take it, is just as fun as Mass Effect 3's multiplayer.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've played, I've played several hours of it, but it's not like a multiplayer structure like that really sort of gets its claws in once people are playing it more, and it's only been
Yeah.
out for a little while. And so much of that depends on BioWare's ability to like keep that game like to keep its performance stable and to give people like enough carrots on a stick, enough incentive to like, hey, keep playing. Progression's fun. We're gonna give you some new characters. Here's some new maps, some weekend events, and
Yeah.
and so like really how that lives and dies is going to be determined in the next few weeks. But
Sure.
as someone who really enjoyed Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, I know Reiner did also. I am excited to keep playing this with my friends.
Did we choose a good game for Game Club? What's your stance on our Game Club
it's
coming
perfect.
up?
I
with
think
Mass
it's
Effect
perfect.
Andromeda. Perfect, really.
Yeah, I mean, you have the history that people, are very familiar with, and I think that's a good starting point for people to dive into this new game.
We
Yeah,
did
I would-
Deus Ex for gameplay.
I think about that all the time. Like, we made it through Deus Ex. This could be worse.
Some of
it's
us
gonna be.
did.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
coward. You dirty coward.
But one reason why I think it's a good Game Club pick is that if you're playing a game that is just universally great and everyone loves, it's not like the discussions aren't interesting, but at some point it's just like everyone gushing about the game.
Right.
I think this game lives in a very interesting space between extremes. It's like some things work well and good, and some things work poorly.
Yeah.
The other thing,
finding the like discussion space between those things, I think is gonna lead to a lot of interesting opinions.
and it's going up through. You're starting on the 30th, right? March 30th.
That is the first episode. That's next week's podcast. Yeah.
So you're going through those first 2 planets.
Yes.
There's so much variation in what's going to happen between everybody's playthroughs. I think that's just going to be interesting. How you handled situations, what little side things you did,
Yeah.
what you're rocking in terms of equipment, all that. I think it's a great, awesome Game Club game.
Yeah. And when you're talking like core story, I bet you could get through those first 2, get through that second planet in maybe 5 to 7 hours if you're like really focused on it.
Yeah.
Or you could easily be 20 hours into the game at that point if you're really like digging into all of the side quest stuff and things like that.
Yeah. We've never said
wow.
it officially on the podcast. So there's kind of like an introductory planet, little story beat, right?
Yep,
and then
that's called Habitat 7.
thank you. And then there's Eos. That's the first planet.
Yep.
Second planet's called do you remember?
Havarl.
Havarl.
Yep, Havarl.
But it's not like you have multiple choices in this.
No, at that
period.
That's where we
point,
left
like,
that
you
because
have to-
choice comes later.
Okay.
Okay, so we're playing for the Game Club, first episode next week, until the end of the main story mission, end of the critical path on Havarl,
Right.
the second real planet.
So what's going to happen there is that like there's still going to be a lot that you can do on Havarl, but
Okay.
your priority your like main mission is going to ask you to go back to a planet called Aya to like do some stuff.
Stop there.
So that's where you can stop, or because it's not story critical stuff, roam around Havarl, get the vault activated, complete some side quests and stuff there.
All right.
I mean, like that's all fair game there.
And so if you're not familiar with Game Club, we play through a game with the community. We encourage people to send their thoughts into podcastgameinformer.com. We'll read it off. There'll be a panel. Reeves, you're doing it, right?
I'm planning on doing it.
You are really a Game Club hero, much more than that
Um,
coward Joe Juba.
We'll be in on the last episode.
Yeah, I'd love to. It'll be a
'Cause we-
huge group.
We
Yeah.
discussed that. And it's like, are we going to talk about stuff that was after not know? You know what?
It
just
gets
getting
messy.
It
confusing?
gets fuzzy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
the
did it-
progression gets weird.
Yeah, we did it for Pokemon, where Kyle was on the last episode. And I
Right.
think it worked well.
Yeah,
but you
it
guys
worked
have to
great.
listen to all the discussions leading up to that point. So it's
I
going to
can't
be a
wait.
great chat.
It's good
so Game Club next week. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can click right here if you want to subscribe and listen to the audio version of the full show. So every Thursday, be sure to check it out.